The golden age of Hollywood is often remembered as a magical time, filled with glamorous movie stars, heroic characters, and unforgettable films that shaped American culture. From the 1920s through the 1950s, the silver screen created powerful myths about beauty, courage, romance, and justice. Actors were treated like gods and goddesses, and their on-screen roles helped define what America believed about itself and the world. These stars were not just entertainers. They were cultural symbols whose images influenced fashion, values, and even national identity. However, behind the polished smiles, elegant costumes, and carefully controlled public images, there existed a much darker reality that Hollywood worked hard to hide. Many of these beloved figures held deeply racist beliefs or participated in racist practices that directly contradicted the ideals they appeared to represent on screen. Hollywood was not only selling movies during this era, it was selling carefully constructed myths about its stars, myths designed to distract audiences from uncomfortable truths. The studio system of Golden Age Hollywood was incredibly powerful and tightly controlled. Major studios managed every detail of a star's public life, from interviews and photographs to personal relationships and political views. Anything that threatened a star's clean image was hidden, denied, or reshaped through clever publicity. As a result, audiences saw only what studios wanted them to see. While actors played heroes who defended justice and fairness, many privately supported ideas that promoted inequality and discrimination. Racist attitudes were not rare exceptions. They were widespread and deeply embedded in the culture of the industry. These beliefs showed themselves not only through private statements, but also through the roles actors accepted and the performances they delivered. Practices like blackface and yellowface were common and openly accepted, even in films meant for families and children. These portrayals reduced entire communities to stereotypes and reinforced harmful ideas that lasted for generations. It is important to understand that this racism was not limited to a few individuals making poor personal choices. Instead, it was supported by an entire system that rewarded such behavior. Studios approved racist scripts, critics praised racist performances, and audiences accepted them as normal entertainment. Actors who performed in blackface or yellowface were often celebrated rather than criticized. In some cases, these performances even earned Academy Awards, Hollywood's highest honor. This acceptance sent a clear message that racist portrayals were not only allowed but valued. Non-white actors, meanwhile, were routinely denied opportunities to play meaningful roles, even when films were about their own cultures and histories. White actors were placed in makeup to portray characters of other races, while real performers of color were pushed aside or excluded entirely. The harm caused by these practices went far beyond the movie screen. Films are powerful tools that shape how people see the world, especially when they are repeated year after year and watched by millions. Racist images in popular movies help normalize discrimination and justify unequal treatment in real life. They taught audiences who deserved respect and who did not. They also shaped how minority communities were viewed, turning complex human beings into simple, often cruel caricatures. Because these films were so popular and influential, their impact lasted long after the credits rolled. Even today, many of these movies are still celebrated as classics, often without full acknowledgement of the damage they caused. Looking back at Golden Age Hollywood forces us to confront difficult questions. Can we admire artistic achievements while also recognizing the harm behind them? How should we deal with beloved stars whose actions and beliefs conflict with modern values of equality and respect? These questions do not have easy answers, but avoiding them only allows harmful myths to survive. By examining the racist actions and choices of Hollywood's most famous figures, we gain a clearer understanding of how deeply these ideas were woven into the entertainment industry. This history is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Only by facing the truth can we begin to understand how these powerful cultural stories shaped the past and how they continue to influence the present. Few figures from Golden Age Hollywood are as famous or as influential as John Wayne. For decades, he stood as the ultimate symbol of American strength, courage, and moral certainty. On screen, Wayne played cowboys, soldiers, and lawmen who defended justice, protected the weak, and stood firm against evil. His tall frame, deep voice, and confident presence made him the perfect embodiment of rugged American values. To millions of fans, John Wayne was not just an actor. He was America itself. His films shaped how generations viewed the nation's history, especially the story of westward expansion, frontier life, and American heroism. However, behind this powerful image was a reality that sharply contradicted everything his characters seemed to stand for. In 1971, John Wayne gave an interview to Playboy magazine that exposed his personal beliefs in a way that shocked many who later learned about it. During the interview, Wayne openly stated that he believed in white supremacy, arguing that white people should remain in positions of power until Black Americans were, in his words, educated to a point of responsibility. These were not vague or misunderstood comments. They were direct, clear statements that left little room for interpretation. Wayne did not express regret or uncertainty. Instead, he doubled down on these views throughout the interview, making it clear that his beliefs were deeply held. He also made disturbing comments about Native Americans, defending the seizure of their land by white settlers and framing it as a necessary act of survival rather than an injustice. What makes John Wayne's case especially troubling is the timing of these statements. Unlike some figures from the very early days of Hollywood, Wayne's career peaked well into the modern era. By the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement was actively challenging segregation and racial discrimination across the United States. Wayne was not a forgotten relic of a distant past. He was one of the most powerful and influential stars of his time, with enormous cultural reach. His words carried weight, and his films helped shape public attitudes about race, history, and national identity. When someone with that level of influence openly supports racist ideas, the impact extends far beyond personal opinion. Hollywood studios worked hard to protect Wayne's image during his lifetime. The carefully crafted myth of John Wayne as a symbol of American goodness remained largely intact, even after his interview became public. Many fans either never heard about his statements or chose to ignore them. His films continued to be celebrated, and his status as a cultural icon remained secure. Even today, his name is attached to landmarks such as John Wayne Airport in California, though there have been growing calls to reconsider such honors. This ongoing debate highlights how difficult it can be to reconcile admiration for a public figure's work with the reality of their personal beliefs. John Wayne's legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about Hollywood's power to shape myths. His on-screen characters presented a version of America that was heroic, fair, and morally clear, while his personal views supported systems of inequality and exclusion. This disconnect was not accidental. It was the result of a studio system that valued profit and image above honesty and accountability. Wayne's films often portrayed American expansion as noble and necessary, while ignoring or erasing the suffering of non-white communities. In this way, his personal beliefs and professional work reinforced each other, strengthening harmful narratives that lasted for decades. Understanding John Wayne's story is essential because it shows how deeply racism was embedded in Hollywood's most celebrated figures. His case is not just about one man's opinions. It is about how powerful cultural symbols can hide disturbing realities and how easily audiences can be persuaded to accept comforting myths instead of confronting difficult truths. Wayne remains an important example of how Golden Age Hollywood created heroes who looked righteous on screen while supporting ideas that caused real harm off-it. A.L. Jolson is often remembered as one of the most important figures in entertainment history, a performer whose career helped change movies forever. In 1927, the jazz singer premiered and became the first feature-length film with synchronized sound, marking a turning point in cinema. At the center of this historic moment was Jolson, whose emotional singing and energetic presence captivated audiences. He was widely promoted as the world's greatest entertainer, a title that reflected both his popularity and influence. However, Jolson's legacy is inseparable from a deeply racist practice that played a central role in his success: blackface. While his achievements helped launch modern filmmaking, they also helped carry racist imagery into a new and powerful medium. Blackface did not begin with Al Jolson. It had existed for decades in minstrel shows, vaudeville, and stage performances, where white performers painted their faces black to mock and stereotype Black Americans. These performances exaggerated physical features, speech patterns, and behavior, reducing Black people to crude caricatures meant for white amusement. What made Jolson's role especially damaging was the scale of his influence. The Jazz Singer was not a small or forgotten production. It was a groundbreaking film seen by massive audiences and remembered as a cultural milestone. By performing in blackface in such an important film, Jolson helped normalize and legitimize this racist tradition for a new generation of moviegoers. Blackface was not a minor or accidental part of Jolson's career. It was a defining feature of his public image. He had built much of his success in vaudeville by performing in blackface, and he continued the practice throughout his film career. After The Jazz Singer, he appeared in blackface again in movies such as The Singing Fool, Mammy, and Big Boy. These performances followed the same harmful patterns, presenting Black characters as exaggerated, simplistic, and less human. At a time when segregation and racial violence were widespread in American society, such portrayals reinforced harmful stereotypes that supported discrimination and inequality. What makes Jolson's case especially complex is the contradiction between his public performances and aspects of his private life. Some historians and biographers have pointed out that Jolson personally supported Black musicians and spoke out against certain forms of discrimination behind the scenes. He sometimes helped Black performers gain opportunities in an industry that largely excluded them. However, these personal actions do not erase the harm caused by his professional choices. Jolson made enormous profits from blackface performances, and his fame helped keep the practice alive long after it should have been questioned and abandoned. This contradiction highlights a troubling truth about early Hollywood. Even individuals who may not have personally hated Black Americans were willing to participate in racist entertainment if it benefited their careers. The Jazz Singer itself reflects this contradiction. On one level, the film tells a story about cultural identity, focusing on a Jewish performer torn between tradition and personal expression. It explores themes of belonging, struggle, and self-discovery. Yet, these themes are delivered through the use of blackface, which relies on the humiliation of another marginalized group. The result is deeply unsettling. A story about one group's search for acceptance is told by demeaning another, revealing how normalized racial hierarchies were within the entertainment industry. A.L. Jolson's legacy forces modern audiences to confront difficult questions about artistic achievement and moral responsibility. Can a film be celebrated for its technical innovation while acknowledging the damage it caused? How do we honor historical milestones without ignoring the harm they helped spread? Jolson's career shows that racism in Hollywood was not hidden at the margins. It stood at the very center of some of the industry's most celebrated moments. His success demonstrates how deeply racist imagery was woven into early cinema and how easily it was accepted as harmless entertainment. Understanding Jolson's role helps us see that Hollywood's racial problems were not accidents of the past, but deliberate choices made by powerful figures whose influence shaped American culture for generations. Mickey Rooney was one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, known for his energetic personality, youthful charm, and ability to appeal to audiences of all ages. During the 1930s and 1940s, Rooney became famous through the Andy Hardy films and a series of popular musical movies alongside Judy Garland. He was seen as the perfect example of an all-American boy, cheerful, harmless, and full of life. Families trusted him, and his films were considered safe entertainment that reflected wholesome values. This reputation makes his later involvement in one of Hollywood's most offensive racist performances even more disturbing. Unlike earlier examples of racism that can be explained away as products of a distant era, Rooney's case shows how deeply racism persisted well into modern Hollywood. In 1961, Rooney appeared in Breakfast at Tiffany's, a film that is still widely praised for its style, romance, and Audrey Hepburn's iconic performance. However, Rooney's portrayal of Mr. Yunioshi, the Japanese landlord, stands out as one of the most offensive racial caricatures in film history. Wearing heavy makeup, fake buck teeth, taped eyelids, and speaking in a loud, exaggerated accent, Rooney reduced Japanese people to a cruel stereotype. The performance was not subtle, accidental, or brief. It was deliberately designed for laughs, relying entirely on mockery. What makes this portrayal especially troubling is that it occurred during the Civil Rights era, at a time when conversations about racial equality were already taking place across America. There was no narrative reason for Mr. Yunioshi to be Japanese, nor was there any need for the role to be played by a white actor in makeup. The character could easily have been written differently or portrayed by an actual Japanese actor. Instead, the filmmakers chose the most degrading option, showing how little concern Hollywood had for the dignity of Asian people. At the time of the film's release, Rooney's performance generated little criticism. Major reviews either ignored the portrayal or treated it as harmless comedy. This lack of backlash reveals how normalized racist humor still was, even in supposedly sophisticated productions aimed at adult audiences. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of Rooney's case came decades later. When asked in interviews about the role, Rooney expressed surprise that anyone found it offensive. He claimed that he had never received complaints and insisted that the performance was meant to be funny, not harmful. These comments show a complete failure to recognize the damage caused by such portrayals. Asian American communities had criticized the character for years, but their voices were largely ignored. Rooney's reaction highlights how Hollywood often dismissed the perspectives of those who were most affected by racist representations. Rooney's involvement in Breakfast at Tiffany's is particularly important because it breaks the illusion that racism in Hollywood was confined to early cinema or extreme examples like blackface, minstrel shows. This was a mainstream film, produced by a major studio, featuring A-list stars and celebrated as a classic. The racism was not hidden. It was placed directly in front of audiences and treated as acceptable entertainment. This demonstrates how deeply embedded racial stereotyping was in Hollywood's creative decision-making, even as society began to change. The lasting legacy of Rooney's performance continues to affect how the film is viewed today. Many modern audiences find the character unbearable, and broadcasters sometimes attempt to downplay or contextualize the scenes. Yet the damage remains. Rooney's case shows how racism was often disguised as humor, allowing it to spread quietly while avoiding serious scrutiny. It also reminds us that beloved stars were not immune to participating in harmful practices. Even those associated with family-friendly entertainment contributed to the normalization of racial mockery. Understanding this history helps explain why such portrayals lingered for so long and why confronting them honestly remains essential. Fred Astaire is remembered as one of the greatest dancers in film history. His smooth movements, graceful style, and perfect timing made him a symbol of class and sophistication. Movies like Top Hat, Swing Time, and Shall We Dance helped define Hollywood musicals and set standards that performers still admire today. Astaire's image was built on elegance, refinement, and artistic excellence. Because of this, many viewers find it difficult to accept that even someone so respected took part in racist practices. Yet, Astaire's career includes moments that show how racism was deeply woven into Hollywood's highest forms of entertainment, even when it appeared polished and artistic. One of the most troubling examples comes from the 1936 film Swing Time. In this movie, Astaire performed a dance number called Bojangles of Harlem, which was meant as a tribute to the famous black dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson. However, instead of honoring Robinson by casting a black performer or collaborating respectfully, Astaire performed the number in blackface. His skin was darkened with makeup, and his costume exaggerated racial imagery that had long been used to mock black people on stage and screen. The sequence was filmed with care, high production value, and artistic seriousness, which makes its racist foundation even more disturbing. At the time, blackface was already widely criticized by black communities and civil rights advocates. It was not an innocent or misunderstood tradition. It came from minstrel shows that dehumanized black people by turning them into jokes and stereotypes. Despite this, Hollywood continued to use blackface because it was familiar to white audiences and financially successful. Astaire, as a leading star with creative influence, had the power to say no. Yet, he went along with the performance, showing how even admired artists accepted racist norms when they benefited their careers. Supporters of Astaire often argue that his intention was respectful and that he admired Black dancers. While it is true that Astaire publicly praised many Black performers and acknowledged their influence on his work, intention does not erase impact. Performing in blackface reinforced the idea that Black culture could be copied, altered, and controlled by white performers while Black artists themselves were excluded from equal opportunities. Hollywood frequently celebrated white stars for styles and rhythms that originated in Black communities, while Black performers were limited to minor roles or entirely shut out of major productions. What makes Astaire's case especially important is how racism was disguised as high art. The dance was beautifully choreographed, the music was elegant, and the scene was treated as serious artistic expression. This presentation made the racism easier to ignore. Viewers were encouraged to admire the skill while overlooking the harmful message beneath it. This pattern allowed racism to survive in Hollywood not through crude jokes alone, but through respected, award-worthy productions that shaped cultural taste. Over time, Astaire's blackface performance has been quietly removed from television broadcasts and home releases of Swing Time. This silent editing reflects Hollywood's discomfort with confronting its past directly. Rather than openly discussing why the scene is harmful, it is often hidden or minimized. While this prevents modern audiences from being exposed to offensive imagery, it also risks erasing an important lesson about how racism functioned in mainstream entertainment. Fred Astaire's legacy remains complex. His contributions to film and dance are undeniable, but they exist alongside choices that helped normalize racist practices. His example shows that racism in Golden Age Hollywood was not limited to villains or openly hateful figures. It was present even among the most talented, admired, and refined stars. Recognizing this truth allows us to understand Hollywood history more honestly and reminds us that artistic brilliance does not excuse participation in harmful traditions. John Wayne was one of the biggest movie stars in Hollywood history. For decades, he represented toughness, patriotism, and traditional American values. His roles in westerns and war films made him a hero to millions of viewers, and his deep voice and strong presence became symbols of masculinity and national pride. Wayne often played characters who stood for justice and courage, which helped build his image as a moral figure on screen. However, off-screen, John Wayne expressed racist views openly and without apology. Unlike some Hollywood stars whose racism appeared mainly through outdated performances, Wayne's racism was direct, public, and shocking even by the standards of his own time. One of the most well-known examples came from a 1971 interview with Playboy magazine. In this interview, Wayne stated that he believed in white supremacy and argued that white people were justified in holding power over others. He spoke negatively about Black Americans and Native Americans, claiming they were not ready for leadership or equality. These comments were not taken out of context or misunderstood. They were clear, deliberate statements made during a period when the civil rights movement had already achieved major legal victories. By the early 1970s, public conversations about racial equality were widespread, making Wayne's words especially disturbing. Wayne's on-screen roles also reflected these attitudes. In many of his Western films, Native Americans were portrayed as violent, uncivilized enemies, while white settlers were shown as brave heroes bringing order. These films rarely explored Native perspectives or acknowledged the violence committed against indigenous communities. Because Wayne was such a powerful presence, his portrayals helped reinforce harmful stereotypes for generations of viewers. Audiences trusted him, and his characters' actions were often framed as righteous, even when they supported ideas of conquest and racial dominance. What makes Wayne's case particularly important is that he was not simply repeating old Hollywood habits without thinking. He actively defended his views when criticized. After his Playboy interview caused backlash, Wayne did not apologize or soften his statements. Instead, he stood by them, showing little concern for how his words affected others. This refusal to reflect or grow reveals how deeply rooted his beliefs were. It also highlights how celebrity status can protect individuals from accountability, allowing harmful ideas to spread without serious consequences. Despite his views, Wayne continued to receive praise, awards, and honors. In 1970, He won an Academy Award for True Grit, and years later, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. These honors demonstrate how Hollywood and American institutions often separated artistic achievement from personal ideology, even when that ideology promoted harm. For many fans, Wayne's legacy remained untouched for decades, while the people affected by his words and portrayals were expected to stay silent. In recent years, John Wayne's reputation has been re-examined. Statues, airport names, and public tributes have sparked debate, with critics arguing that honoring Wayne without acknowledging his racism sends the wrong message. Supporters often claim that he was simply a product of his time. However, many of his statements were considered extreme even when he made them. Other actors of his era supported civil rights or chose to remain silent rather than spread hateful ideas. John Wayne's story shows that racism in Golden Age Hollywood was not always hidden behind scripts or makeup. Sometimes, it was spoken clearly and proudly by the industry's biggest stars. Understanding this reality helps explain how deeply racism shaped Hollywood's influence on culture. It also reminds us that popularity and hero status do not guarantee moral leadership. Facing these uncomfortable truths allows audiences to engage with film history more honestly and thoughtfully.